Hey guys, Magna back here for some more tutorials. Today we're going to be talking about using Colossus and Protoss versus Zerg. Namely, we want to talk about getting to that point safely and economically, how to properly support your Colossus, and how you can end a game with your Colossus tech. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about using Colossus in this matchup, and they constantly talk about, oh, I just died to a lot of things, or it doesn't really work out because I just get overrun really quickly. And honestly, a lot of that is just because they're just not expanding fast enough. So it seems funny, but the faster you get a third base up, the easier handling Colossus is. So we're going to talk about that a lot as we look at these replays. So the first replay we're going to look at is Maxed versus Sen. And this should be pretty interesting to talk about. We're going to mostly talk about ways to get to Colossus, and then kind of watch them hold off attacks throughout the game. Some of these games we'll watch them in, but if they're super long, we won't worry too much about that. So this is about 18 minutes. And before I forget here, actually, I forgot to change my sensitivity, so I don't want to be flying all over the screen here. There we go. So, obviously, you don't want to do Colossus on one base. That's pretty obvious. That'll take way too long to get out. You typically don't want to do Colossus on two bases either, so getting this expansion up is a very important part, of course. And we've already talked about that at length, so no real reason to go back into that too much. But this is just a pretty greedy gateway expand, and you're going to see this a lot in Korea right now. So because the Zergs like to go a lot 3-hatch before pool. These two guys aren't Korean either way, but the Korean meta does kind of dictate everywhere else in the world. So, Forge on the way. This could very well be a Stargate opener, and Stargate is one of the ways you can get into Colossus, and if that's the case, whoa, I'm like totally messing up here. But if that's the case, you can do that, but this is going to be a little bit different here. We can see a Sentry, +1, and Warp Gate all coming up at the same time. You don't typically go Stargate off of that. And we'll see what this actually is. Looks like it's just going to be a little bit of a gateway timing, or just an expansion off of it, so we'll have to see what Maxed wants to do with this. And yeah, based upon these units coming down here, this does look like an expansion. So this 7-minute expansion is becoming very common in this matchup, and this is one of the ways you're going to want to get into Colossus. Of course, you will only have a few units out here, and this is all based on scouting. Maxed should know, or at least have a good idea what's going on, by seeing this third base here, knowing that the Zerg just is interested in droning from this point. And we've talked about scouting a lot, and if they're just going for something 2-base, there's really no reason to take this third. So you need to be verified that they are going for a third base and that they are droning pretty heavily before you decide to just run down here and take your own third. Because if they're just going 2-base, they're just going to kill you. That's kind of silly. So, taking a third base here is the Protoss, and he's just doing it off of a couple of gateway units. Note that he does have extra gateways before he decides to take this, because you can't just go like one gate third base. That's about as greedy as it gets, and usually we're able to hold stuff with that. Just a little bit of counter pressure here, but this is mostly what I wanted to focus on was the blink. We've talked about using blink before in this matchup, but we never really showed the Colossus transition because this is getting so common as far as getting into Colossus that way. So we're going to see some attacks push across the map here from the Zerg player. And if you have blink and some good upgrades and you can use force fields, this is one good way to hold these types of attacks. You kind of just want to force the Zerg to engage at a point that they don't want to. So note that there's extra cannons coming up here. He does have one protected. He can overcharge his Nexus. He can always move his probes if he's taken too much damage there. But these force fields are just going to be to cut up the army into small little bite-sized chunks. So you can get part of it killed and then get the rest of it killed pretty easily and kind of separate the battle into two smaller battles. So we're going to see Maxed continue to hold this, and I believe the example that we're showing in this replay is that if the Zerg continues to attack you over and over, and you're going for Colossus and you can defend against these earlier aggression type of attacks, or rather third base canceling type of attacks, then the Colossus transition is going to be super strong, and often you won't even need to take a fourth base. You can usually just win if they're being really aggressive against you throughout the game. So here's the Colossus Bay coming up now. Note that the timing of the Colossus Bay is roughly 11 minutes or so. You can get it a little bit faster. It really depends on your robo, it depends on how fast you get your blink and whatever you're spending your money on. You don't want to get it too early and just kill yourself because you don't have enough units against these types of timings. So a good mid-range timing is, like we said, about this 11-minute roughly type of Colossus Bay. That'll put the first Colossus on the field at about 13 minutes. And 13 minutes is really when Roach Hydra starts to get really big. And if you have enough force fields and stuff to kind of push them back and let the Colossus deal their damage, that's usually how you're going to get into this pretty safely. So it's kind of a slow transition. it's a lot of people get into their mind that I need Colossus in order to win, so I need to get it as soon as possible. But padding it with this blink play is going to be really good, especially if you can scout them going mutas, because we've talked about that a little bit as well. Blink is a really good build against mutas. If they're going for it right away, then you can just go for it. And one of the common ways you can lose with Colossus is if they go with something that just directly counters it, such as mutas. So in this game, it looks like Sen wants to mix in just a handful of swarm hosts. There is a Spire on the way, so I'm not sure if this is going to be for Corruptors or for mutas, so we're just going to have to continue to play this out to see how he reacts. Now this is another really important factor, is these extra Stargates here. By this stage of the game, you probably want to be on a couple of Stargates anyway, because Void Rays are so good to supplement your Colossus. Staying on Stalkers forever is not the greatest decision, because they can be kind of low DPS, a little bit stale, a little bit linear. The Void Rays offer you a little more flexibility, and more importantly, if they start to switch into Mutalisks, at least you'll have the buildings ready to go to start up Phoenix. So these 2 extra Stargates in conjunction with the Colossus starting is really, really good. So we can see the first Colossus is out, about 13 minutes like we talked about, so he's marching across the field. And if you really feel brave, you can start getting out on the map here, but note that the recall is always an option. And there are a few swarm hosts out like we talked about. They won't be that big of a factor because they're just not enough to be that much of a factor. And we've already talked about that a little bit. So there comes a little bit of a recall. We can see that coming down here just in case you get harassed. So note that the Mothership Core is a very important component in Colossus builds, that you can kind of adventure out on the map and do whatever you want, but if you get in trouble you can just recall. And there's also a little bit of harassment going on here. Not too imperative for Colossus plays, so mostly this is just about winning these types of fights. And we'll note that the Colossus doesn't even need to be that big of a mainstay in your army. There's only this one Colossus here, but this army is actually really strong against what the Zerg has. Mostly because of force fields, and mostly because of the attack upgrades and blink. So you can see +3 is finishing up, and if you're getting Colossus, you want your upgrades to finish at about this time. 14 minutes and having +3 is really, really good. So that's why we saw him spinning it early and often. And +3 Colossus is way better than, say, something like +1 Colossus, especially if the Zerg decides to skimp on their upgrades a little bit. +3 is going to mow through this army really fast, and it'll be much easier to protect yourself against the support that the Zerg might bring to help out these Colossus. So here comes the Void Ray support as well. This will be really good if they start to try to switch into things like Ultras, because Ultras are really good against Stalker Colossus. So the Void Ray padding is really smart in the late game, and that's something that you probably want to look into your own game. It's something that's really becoming the norm in this matchup for more longer game Colossus type of plays, is getting into Void Rays, maybe eventually into Tempest if they start to go for things like Broodlords. And even Tempest as a whole are really not bad to start supplementing that with. But the Void Rays are definitely very good. So you can see armor upgrades are on the way. Beyond your first +3, beyond your first attack upgrades, these don't tend to matter too much. I honestly prefer shields because then it benefits your Void Rays as well. The armor won't really matter that much, so a lot of people actually do play without it. So there's not a whole lot to say about that. Here comes the Void Rays overcharging and wasting these Corruptors really fast. You can see that's another use for them, as people will try to counter the Colossus with Corruptors, and the Void Rays just hammer through them. And now that you have 4 Colossus on the map, this is when you can start getting really bold, and you can start getting really on top of them. You can see once he has 3 Colossus, or rather 4 Colossus and +3 done, he's just being like, okay, my army is hardcore. I can really get out on the map and do some damage now if I just go, knowing that I also have the Mothership Core to recall if I do get into trouble. So you can be plenty adventurous against this, and note that the Swarm Hosts are really not doing much at all, because the 4 Colossus and the attack upgrades burn the Locust down before they can do too much. So this is just going to end the game. I mean, we can see that Sen invested too much in trying to deal damage there in the mid-game, and not nearly enough in trying to counter the Colossus. So these Corruptors just get absolutely decimated. The Swarm Hosts are doing nothing. It's just plowing through the Zerg army right now. And honestly, the Void Rays are doing a lot more work than it seems. So the Stalkers are doing well as well. The Blink is doing well. The +3 is doing well. But mostly, it's the fact that these Colossus are still alive. He's up to 5 right now. And if you can keep your Colossus alive, you can check their kill counts and see that they're really doing a lot of work here. 30 kills, 36 kills. It's just craziness, and yeah, sometimes you can just push for the win here. Note that Max had never decided to take a 4th base because he knew he could win with that more than likely. I would say it's best just to take a 4th base as you're starting to get aggressive, once you're +3 and your 4 Colossus or so are on the field, just to be sure that just in case that attack fails, you have a backup plan. But yeah, that's a really strong Colossus play there from Maxed. So let's go ahead and jump into another game where we can show a little bit of a different strategy being employed. This is going to be Crank versus Shigua. Shigua, yet another Chinese player. So Chinese players getting really big here in the Starcraft scene recently. So good to see that coming up. But it's going to be on Alter Zim, one of the bigger maps. Typically on bigger maps you might see things like Mutalisks. So you need to be mindful of the map, and especially the map size and what the Zerg might want to do on that map. So on this map, if you were a Zerg and you wanted to do something like Roach Hydra like we saw in the last game, the rally distance is enormous. It takes them like probably 30 or 40 seconds just to get the units from their spawn to your base. And that's a pretty big deal because those 30 or 40 seconds could be even an additional Colossus if you chrono boosted it really hard. So that's why Roach Hydra isn't typically as popular on larger maps. So if you want to use Colossus-based strategies, you do need to keep that in mind and think that, well, the Zerg might want to do something different because it's such a huge map. So this game we're seeing Crank, he's just opening up again with that greedy Nexus play. You need to really be careful with stuff like this. I'm not trying to advocate that, but this game we're going to see Crank opening up with the Stargate. And this is going to be a little bit different from what we saw. This is kind of an older style to open up with the Stargate and go into Colossus. Note that we are seeing the Forge. And he's opening with an Oracle here, and I'm going to explain the usefulness of taking a third base with the Oracle and then transitioning afterward. So let's say we have the Oracle done. Let's take a look at our unit composition right now. If we're Crank, we have 1 Zealot, 1 Sentry, 1 Oracle, and 1 Mothership Core. This is going to be plenty to hold off any Zergling attacks that try to cancel your base. And the reasoning is that if you turn on the Oracle attack, its damage actually can kill Zerglings in 2 hits, and it fires really, really fast. So you can really burn down a lot of Zerglings, and you can hold third bases quite comfortably against a lot of Zergling counters that might try to cancel it. So note that he's bringing his probe down here right now. Between his Mothership Core, his Zealot, and his Sentry, he should be totally fine against any counters, and he can take a third base pretty safely. Well, notice it's that 7-minute timing window to take a third, and then getting into Colossus after that is a lot easier. So we'll see what Crank wants to do with this. He's just going to send his Oracle out here, maybe knowing that Shigua isn't typically that aggressive against third attempts. So he's just scouting around, maybe going to try to kill some drones here. You can be a little bit adventurous, but know that this is a little bit of a risk doing stuff like this. And note that he's also getting his attack upgrades, he's getting his Twilight Council, but the Forge this game is, or rather the Robo this game is a lot faster. So this could also be for something like Blink Colossus once again. But alternatively, he could also go for extra Stargates and just go for straight into Void Ray Colossus and add on some more extra cannons here just to defend himself with Void Ray Colossus a little bit better. So this doesn't necessarily need to be like a Blink opener after a third base to get into Colossus. You can do it a little bit faster, but you are a little bit more vulnerable to some timing, so just keep that in mind. This could also be just to line up his upgrades well enough to get +2 on time. And here's the Spire, so this is what you need to be aware of that can definitely come down. Mutalisk play is very common against Colossus openers, and this is definitely what Crank has on his mind, is going Colossus. But if he's not ready for the Mutalisk, then he's going to be in a lot of trouble. So note that he scouts it out, he starts Phoenix upgrades, so I'm pretty sure he saw it. I don't know why else he would do this, yeah. So he sees the Spire. You'll notice that Shigua's trying to be cute here and trying to hide it with these Overlords, but he knows, so he's starting the +1 to air units, starting Phoenix, and he, like I said, he can just add on Stargates here and make a handful of Phoenix. And if it doesn't turn out to be Mutalisk and it's just a fake here, or if he just starts Corruptors or something, he can switch into Void Rays if he needs to. Staying on top of your scouting and knowing what to do with your Colossus openers is really important here. So he hasn't really committed to the Colossus quite yet, because he knows that Mutalisks are an option. And just because Shigua knows that Crank scouted it, he's also starting a Hydralisk den, maybe to try and fake him out a little bit. So this is why you don't want to go too crazy on trying to counter the Mutalisk if you're not quite sure what's going on yet. And he's going to continue to send hallucinations in here just to verify what's coming out of these eggs. So he needs to know what's happening here. But still, the +1, the handful of Phoenix is never going to be bad. So he's just putting that together. And if he starts to see stuff like Hydralisk come out instead of Mutalisk, then that's going to make a lot more sense. He does see, I mean, there is Hydralisk range coming down here. He is showing some Roaches and Zerglings for just a little bit. He needs to see these Hydralisks, and I think he started to figure out what's going on. I think he's saying, if this were Mutalisk, I would have seen something by now. So he starts his Robobay. Note that it's about at the same time as before. He also starts Blink, and he's also adding on some gateways here. So this was a little bit of a feign from the Zerg player to make him think that he's going Mutalisk and kind of react improperly against the Hydralisk play. But Crank figured it out, so he knows what's going on. There's also Corruptors on the way. So the +1 attack on the maybe potential Void Race he might start mixing into here is going to be really strong. And again, underlying factor here, the upgrades for attacks are constantly spinning on this Forge. Getting that +3 as soon as possible is going to be what really pushes your Colossus to the next level and can really burn down Zerg armies if they're being lackadaisical on their upgrades. So the unit composition from before is basically the same, but it looked a lot different from the openers. And we're also trying to showcase a different opener with the Oracle. So some different stuff coming down here, but the unit composition looks pretty much the same. So kind of more of the same stuff here. Once we get more stabilized into this game, I'm not sure how much further we're going to go, considering we saw the whole game play out the way this one's going to from last game. This one, probably, he wins a big fight when he has +3 and the Zerg has kind of mediocre upgrades. And note that he's using his force fields and his stalkers once again to try and absorb most of this damage. The really smart thing he's doing is he's saying, I don't really have good support against these Corruptors, and since there's only one Colossus, I might as well just keep it alive during this, since I can probably hold it with the rest of my unit composition. Best case scenario, this Colossus would probably shoot like 3 or 4 units and then die. So you might as well just keep it alive if you can't handle the Corruptors quite yet, and make it seem like he has wasted supply in this. So some smart moves going on with the Colossus here, and really mixing it up well to keep that alive and kind of keep the next stage of this game going. You can see with good enough upgrades and with good force fields, a little bit of good blink micro, you should be good against these types of attacks. Upgrade's going to finish here pretty soon. It was a little bit faster in the last game, but he did have to react for a little bit to that potential needless play. And he's going to clear out his third base, or rather fourth base, and take a third, or a fourth. Jeez, I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm thinking third expansion here. I promise I know numbers, but so yeah, kind of just waiting for that third attack level to finish, and once it does, he can start getting super aggressive, and he can do a lot of work with that. So we're seeing the Colossus count continue to rise here. We're at 3 right now. Stalker, Colossus, pretty standard stuff here. Third base, or rather fourth base, hasn't quite been taken yet. So from this point, if you have a lot of Corruptors on you, you probably do want to throw up these Guardian Shields, of course, but you can pull your Colossus back for just a little bit when you've thrown down your force fields. Just to keep your Colossus alive and try to focus the Corruptors down. We talked about that in the micro video against Zerg, so that's something to note. But like I said, this game kind of plays out like the previous one. There's not a whole lot more to know. You can see from the timer that he wins a fight, and then he wins another fight as he's walking across the map, and that basically ends the game. So there's nothing too fancy going on here. I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of a different opener. So I have one more replay we're going to take a look at to kind of show you guys some slight variations between this. Maybe a little bit longer game. We're going to see Stardust versus TLO. And TLO is known to be rather weird, rather aggressive in these days, especially against Protoss. So we're going to see a little bit of a longer game, 26 minutes. We're going to kind of blow through most of the openers here, and we'll mention little bits of information about them as we go along. But this looks like it's going to be a Nexus first and a Forge. I would expect nothing less. Or actually, it's going to be Forge first. He's just probably going to open up with maybe some cannon feigning, or maybe some cannon, you know, attacks or whatnot, but maybe not. Yeah, just a Forge. So he's just getting his expansion up here, nothing too crazy. I mostly want to see how he's going to get his third base, because that's one of the most important factors to Colossus builds, is how do you get your third. I'm going to see the attack upgrade starting, warp gate starting, so this is all very indicative of something that wants to go a little bit more late game after a third base. So, nothing too wild going on so far. You can see the extra gateways are coming up. He's going to be on 4 gateways, a couple of sentries, a few gateway units. There's the Twilight Council, and here's the expansion. So this is kind of similar to the first game in the sense that he just goes straight for gateway units and getting the blink upgrade as soon as possible. So, nothing too wild. I should mention that there is a style where you can open Phoenix and just harass for a little while and then get a little bit of a later third base. We're not seeing that quite yet because there's going to be a separate video that mostly focuses on the Phoenix component of it, but that is also viable. The blink stuff is super standard in PvZ right now though. Like, I'd say at least half of the pro games that are PvZ you're going to see builds like this, where they just open up with a really standard blink and gateway stuff just to get their third base. And TLO is showing some aggression here, so he's going to have to hold this with his blink play. We've talked about this a lot in the Blink video, so like I said, we're going to skip over most of this part until the Colossus start to come out and we start to see some later game stuff. So a little bit of engagement here, some good force fields just to cut off the roaches. Getting a little bit sloppy now though, so that's not boding too well. Still, most importantly, it's just to make sure this third is safe, so he's just getting all that put together. He should put his Robo down here any second, just to start up that Colossus tech. It looks like it's going to be a little bit later, so Robo Bay starts at 12 minutes this time, a little bit later. That's mostly because he was being aggressive out on the map, trying to deal some damage with this blink. But still, the +3 should be starting here, and he's kind of slacking a little bit, to be honest. He has a lot of money floating, but still getting that started here. Now we're seeing the hive here from TLO, so this could be a Viper play, which I'm glad, because I really wanted to talk about countering Vipers. So, we'll see that come up. At least I'm pretty sure this can be for Vipers. Here's the Colossus Bay. You can see it's late once again because the first Colossus is usually out by about 13 minutes, but this one's not going to be until much, much later. Just want to show that it is still viable to get the later Colossus if you want to be more aggressive with your blink opener. And here's also a Spire from the Zerg, so we need to see where he's going to go with that. But I'm pretty sure this is just for Vipers for right now. And yeah, there's the Vipers coming out now. So coming up here is the army, just trying to deny a little bit of creep here. And of course, he can always just blink away or use his Mother recall if he gets in a little bit of trouble. So trying to start up some drops here. Greater Spire on the way. This is something you definitely need to worry about if you're going against Colossus. One of the ways is a lot of Zergs will counter Colossus is they'll just decide what are Colossus really bad against? And they're really bad against things like Ultras. They're bad against things like Broodlords, mainly because you need your gas invested into other things other than Colossus. I mean, they'll deal with Broodlings okay, but that's a losing battle that you're eventually going to have trouble with. They're bad against Mutalisks, which we talked about in the last game a little bit. But still, they can be useful in these types of situations, and the late game transitions are really what you want to watch out for. So, getting aggressive up here with his blink once again, and we're still seeing the +3 attack upgrade is done right now. Colossus are starting on the way, and this would be so much stronger if he had more Colossus. So we can see starting faster Colossus would have been important. Note that he's going double Robo Colossus. This can be viable from your 4th base and beyond, mostly to have the Robo production to deal with Ultras, which we're seeing coming up right now, and also to have the Robo production to put enough Colossus out to deal with Swarm Hosts. So this double Robo Colossus is something I really don't mind once you take your 4th base. I wouldn't be too wild about going double Robo Colossus on like 3 base though. This is for a super late game type of play, and this is really just to counter the late game stuff that Zerg can bring out. The mid game stuff, a lot of people just get into their mind that if I want Colossus, I can get twice as many Colossus with 2 Robos, and it's like, well, yeah, you can, but you're going to be investing a lot of these very front loaded. Like, you're going to be putting a lot of money in these Colossus, and you won't be seeing them for quite a while. And in the meantime, you could die to an attack. So I would just stay on 1. And then maybe you can go double a little bit later. So 2 Colossus being incremented out at a time. Here's Charge on the way for the Zealots. Pretty common stuff here. Templar Archives to start supporting against things like Vipers. We haven't seen a fight in a little while because TLO is trying to transition into super later game tech. So all I'm really going to say about the Vipers too much is that if you can scout the Vipers coming out, the Templar Archives is the best just to try and feedback them. But you can also use things on your sentries like Hallucination to try to get him to grab the wrong Colossus. Most of the time, if you just manage this properly, if you can feedback the Vipers or if they waste their energy on something else, they're not that big of a deal, but that can become a little bit of a problem. So if you're having a lot of problem with Vipers, try to just mix in faster Templar Archives and you should be okay. Canceling the base here. Stardust is trying to run down an army over here at the side. We really need to see what the hive tech is going to be for him, though. And there are also points with Colossus compositions where you will want to just waste supply so you can switch into better stuff. So if you just throw these Zealots away and you can make 2 more Colossus, for example, then that'll be better. So that's why we're seeing that. Going to see a little bit of a base trade here as he's getting a little bit sloppy and letting his bases die. So he does lose a base, and he's also harassing at the same time. So this game's getting a little bit crazy, and this can be how games will go. So if you know you can beat the army out here, but it's just refusing to fight you, you can just counterattack a little bit with your own weapons and see what you can get done with that. So Zealot's doing a lot of damage here, just trying to chase down the army, and the Broodlord transition is on the way. So this is why I also recommend those extra Stargates at this phase of the game, because those Stargates could also be used to produce Tempest, which can easily shoot down these Broodlords. But the other side of it is that if you're just aggressive enough and you can catch him while he's switching into this Broodlord composition, then all of a sudden they really don't matter. One Stalker Volley will make him waste all this money. Getting the Colossus on there, now that he knows the Broodlords are on the way, he can start the Stargates, so he'll be in pretty good shape there. Some Vipers throwing down some Blinding Clouds. There's a hallucinated Colossus like we were talking about just to get the Vipers to maybe try and pull the wrong units. He probably will, this is really sloppy, wow. He probably will want to eventually get some Templar on the field to deal with these Vipers, considering they can become a little bit of a problem. Here's also the Ultra switch here, so TLO is just trying to do everything at the same time. And of course, the proper response to Ultras is just using your double robo to start putting out Immortals. And once he figures this out, he'll have to do that. They really don't become a huge problem until you have maybe 7 or 8 Ultras on the field. But yeah, from this point, I mean, we can see the game is about 6 more minutes. There's really just some countering of Hive Tech going on here. He's starting to mix in some Tempest. You can see the Fleet Beacon coming up here. Dark Shrine just for better harassment. Extra Stargate. He's also on double robo just to get those Immortals started once he figures out that Ultras are on the way. But this game basically ends after he responds properly to the Ultras. Just gets out some Immortals, or maybe just doesn't have enough Ultras to deal with the big army that Stardust is carrying around. So there's not a whole lot much more to say about using Colossus in this matchup. This is mostly late game stuff, so we'll just call that good here. I hope you guys enjoyed that, or at least had some good ideas as far as how to get into Colossus in this game and how to use them properly. It's really just getting a faster third base and taking it safely, getting the +3 upgrades and kind of knowing when to press your advantages with these Colossus, and also understanding that you need to support it properly. They're not just going to be the unit that's going to kill everything. They won't do well against a lot of Ultras. They won't do well against Broodlords or Mutalisks or anything like that, so you definitely need to know when and where to switch that out. So yeah, I'll be back with more videos, and I guess I'll see you guys later. Take care.